Our guest today is unlike any guest we've ever had on the show, and that's exciting, of course. Her name is Ersula K Odom, and for lack of a better way to put it, she's a historical interpreter, a character actor, so to speak, someone who assumes the full persona of Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune and gives presentations to different groups who are interested in learning about her. How did you become aware of this fascinating woman with both of them, I guess, Ersula and Mary McLeod Bethune, and this project she has taken over?
Well, I mean, Mary McLeod Bethune, of course, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, one of the most significant figures Florida's ever produced. She founded Bethune-Cookman College. She was a noted educator. She set educational standards for other historically Black colleges and universities. She was an advisor to presidents. She's a civil rights activist and helped get people registered to vote. And so I was doing some research on her because I wanted to find a way that we could highlight her achievements. Sure. And in looking at the Florida Humanities Council website, I saw that they had someone who went out and talked about her. And I thought, oh, she talks about her. Oh, wait, she does more than just talk about her. She becomes her.
Yeah.
And I said, that sounds like somebody we should talk to. So so that's why I suggested we.
And most people have seen, these historical reenactments, whether you go to some sort of Civil War or Revolutionary War era fort or colonial Williamsburg or that sort of thing, where the folks dress up and have scripts and do their independent study on what these figures would talk about and in-person interpretation. But Ersula goes way beyond a hobbyist or a weekend.
This ain't cosplay.
Yeah, no, not at all.
No, she becomes the character. She's done research on her and has gone to where she lived and seen how she lived, and she's just she really gets into it.
Yeah, it is a fascinating. I was going to call it a job, but it's certainly more than a job to her. A passion project that she's turned into this incredible calling. And boy, Craig, again, I have lived all over the country, born in Wisconsin, lived in Georgia, Alabama, Oregon, Connecticut. And I always think when doing this podcast, could you do that same podcast and have all these stories about Connecticut or Wisconsin? Man, I don't think so. Every state has a great story, but when you talk about Mavini Betch, who we've profiled before, and Zora Neale Hurston and Marjorie Stoneman Douglas and Mary McLeod Bethune, and all of these incredibly prominent, powerful women who have influenced this state. It's Augusta Savage. It's an incredible, and I know that's scratching the surface. It's an incredible legacy.
Tell me how you got started doing this performance as Mary McLeod Bethune. You didn't, as I understand it, you didn't know much about her when the first time you did it.
No, I did not at all. In fact, the only thing I knew was that FAMU and Bethune-Cookman had a great football game and band music, and you could party.
The Florida Classic.
How I got started is that I wrote a book called At Sula's Feet, and that's the life lessons learned at my grandmother's feet. And I was reading from it. Some friends of mine asked me to apply with the Florida Humanities Council to portray Mary McLeod Bethune. Well, I had no idea who she really was. And I did a little research, went to present, and just fell in love with the whole idea of that. And at the time, they looked at me and they said, well, you don't really look like her. We're not so sure that you could do this. I said, oh, but yes, I can. Yes, I can. I almost started begging them to do it at that point because I had just become wonderfully enamored with her and her image and her legacy. So they eventually said, okay. And I've just enjoyed the journey since then.
What captivated you about her?
Well, the fact that you're talking one person, but she lived like 5 lives. It's amazing how far-reaching her impact has been and continues to be. You think of her as the educator that started a college, but she advised many presidents and was a major player with Roosevelt. So she was more than the educator that everyone knows her to be, but she was that too.
And also raising a family at the same time, right?
Yes.
Quite an accomplishment, all of it. What surprised you the most as you started digging into her life? What didn't you know and you were like, holy cow, I can't believe this?
Well, that she was behind so many well-known things. Like, for instance, she negotiated the right for young people in historically Black colleges to learn how to fly airplanes.
Oh,
and
wow.
From that, you know about Tuskegee Airmen.
Yeah.
Now, you take that a little bit further, and that means that if you have an ancestor that flew in that war, you may not have existed if it had not been for the Tuskegee Airmen, because they didn't lose a pilot. And so that in itself is quite amazing to think about.
Well, and one of them ended up becoming the first African-American four-star general, Daniel Chaffee James.
Yes.
From my hometown, Pensacola.
What background in acting did you have to bring to this new position?
Well, my background was somewhat eclectic. I graduated from Eckerd College as a theater major, but I did not get a chance to practice that because the first attempt I made to make money at it didn't work. And I said, whoa, this is not for me. I ended up spending 20 years in the computer industry from a programmer training up through management. So I did something which would appear to be totally different, but in fact it wasn't, because often I heard people talk about my entrepreneurial spirit and the fact that my department was quite interesting. I remember one time we had a department meeting and I brought in a magician, and I shouldn't say brought in because he was a part of the team, but I allowed him to perform.
Wow.
And so we did those kinds of things. So the theatrical part of me lived through all of that techie stuff too.
But this was your chance to employ those skills that you learned in college to portray this character.
What is the key to getting into character, getting into that mindset? Obviously, this is a historical interpretation. This is not, you're just winging it and using her name. And you have to obviously know the historical background. And I'm sure you've read everything and watched everything and traveled in her footsteps where possible. What is the key to getting into that headspace to become Mary McLeod Bethune?
One of the things I had to do, obviously, was research, because with the Florida Humanities Council, you are not allowed to say something you don't know anything about. So you have to prove that you've gotten the information from a reliable source and then put it together where it makes sense as far as humanities are concerned. So that's one thing. But in terms of presenting the information, there was so much that I couldn't possibly put it all in any one presentation. So I had to look through and pull out the things that I thought would resonate with the average and ordinary person. One, from an emotional point of view, and then two, from I want to know more. So if I introduce something to you that causes you to go research, then I have fulfilled the task. In terms of presenting her, I had to think in terms of the essence of her as opposed to trying to emulate her voice or to look exactly like her. I simply wanted to suspend your reality for a moment so that you can imagine her. So that's what I do. I heard her voice and it does not sound like mine. Mm-hmm. Even if I attempted to duplicate or totally sound like her, I probably could, but it would be an incredible strain on my voice and that would not make for a good presentation. So I don't do that. What I call upon is the fact that I grew up in the backwoods of Georgia. My grandmother is from South Carolina, and she would have been the same age as Dr. Bethune's son. So I speculated that how my grandmother spoke, some of the things that she believed and how she acted would have been similar, because my grandmother also went to Hampton Institute. So there was that same kind of educational mindset that I could say that she would have been of the same mindset as Dr. Bethune. And coming from South Carolina, there are things like the way she said things. And one thing that really stuck in my head is that grandmother never said, oh, she would say ought, as in 1904. And so when I get to when the college was formed, I say that. I'll say 1904. And so that, to me, is a sense of being authentic for the time, and a salute to my grandmother, too.
That's great. Dr. Bethune, she didn't start off by starting a college. She started off a school, sort of out of necessity, didn't she?
Yes. She taught in South Carolina as one of her first engagements. And then she went to Savannah, Georgia. And from Savannah, a pastor from Palatka, Florida, asked her to come down to Palatka to actually start a school. And she did that. She was there for about 5 years. And then someone called her to Daytona under the same kind of carrot, I should say, because she was told that there was such a need for her services in Daytona, and especially with the railroad coming down and the workers following that work and the families following the workers and then the children needing some attention. And that's what drew her there.
You mentioned her connection to Franklin Delano Roosevelt earlier. She was a member of what was called Roosevelt's Black Cabinet. How did she get into that position and on the radar screen of Roosevelt?
First, she was so active and became the focal point for Daytona area, Florida in general, because of the things that she was doing in education, obviously because of the school. But when she worked with people as it related to the hurricane that took place in Florida that wiped out so many people that Zora Neale Hurston wrote about and what have you, there was one thing that was shared with me by a descendant of Undertaker that just resonated with me. He said that his grandfather called Dr. Bethune down to Belle Glades to pray for people because of the mass graves that were being filled with people that had perished. And so she ended up advocating for Black people being a part of the Red Cross. That's what got her to New York for then Governor Roosevelt. She was also very familiar with his mother because of the women's organizations that she was a part of. So she went there to represent the National Association of Colored Women. And the National Association of Women was having a dinner. And that's where President Roosevelt's mother, Sarah Roosevelt, was. And that's where she also met Eleanor Roosevelt. So campaigning for them and successfully campaigning for his presidency, there was a sense of obligation. And he invited her or called her to work for him in an official position in Washington, D.C. to first chair the National Youth Association's conference. And that went so well, he then made her a director of the National Youth Association. And that's where all of these young people were given the opportunity to learn different skills and become productive, especially during wartime. And it was one hand washed the other. So she became the window to what Blacks needed, and they became the tool to get the things that Blacks needed during the time, especially as her relationship with Eleanor Roosevelt.
And that helped to shift Black voters away from the Republican Party to supporting the Democratic Party at the time. Right?
Yes, there was something that I read not too long ago that helped explain that. There was the Great Migration that took place during that time frame. And so the numbers of Black people were going north, and Republicans did not understand the impact, or reportedly, they did not understand the impact of that movement. And so Mary Terrell, who was another leader, went to them and wanting to have them put her in a position so that she could advocate for the Republican Party. And she was kind of snubbed from what all accounts of it. Whereas the Democratic Party did not treat that the same way, and they took it seriously, and the numbers went that way.
Yeah, to give people a very broad and basic history lesson if they're not familiar, because Abraham Lincoln was a Republican, Black voters sided with Republicans in the late 19th and early 20th century, and that began to change, like you mentioned, around the time of the Great Migration, FDR, Great Depression, that sort of thing. I'm also reading a biography here online where Harry Truman appointed Bethune as the only woman of color at the founding conference of the United Nations in 1945. Her list of achievements goes on and on and on and on and on. It's extraordinary. What was it about her? Obviously, she was smart. Obviously, she had intellect. I mean, aside from the obvious, what was it about her? Daughter of slaves, South, Reconstruction, Jim Crow era, that allowed her to rise up and become everything she became and have the impact she did?
I'm beginning to think, because of her story and because of other things that I've experienced as an individual, that When you're young, when you're a little child, one or two events can shape your entire life. And that may be the case with her, because when she was a little girl, right after slavery or right after emancipation, she went back to the home that her mother was once a slave of to accompany her to carry a load of wash. And she just wanted to play with the little girls in the yard. And sometime during that exchange, they told her she couldn't read the book that she picked up. And that destroyed her for the moment, but it may have set in motion who she became overall, because she became determined that she was going to learn to read and write, and she understood the value of it. And if you have that kind of drive, then you want to share that with other people. And she had that caring, nurturing feeling. So it's just natural that this little girl, once she learned how to read and that she understood the value of it, that she would want to share it. And she wanted to be a missionary, I guess, because of the missionary spirit that she saw in her mother and father.
Now, she ended up not becoming a missionary sort of because of racial prejudice, right?
Well, yeah, she ended up getting an education, ended up at Moody Bible Institute at the time. And she thought that she was going to go on a mission with that school, or commissioned by them, and was told that there was no need for Negroes in Africa, and she didn't get that assignment. So that was another one of those days that became life-changing, life-affecting. So if I were to point, well, actually there's another series of things that happened, but those two events plus some dreams that she had later on helped shape who she became. However, as far as her missionary spirit, she went to work with Lucy Laney in Augusta, Georgia. And there she saw who she wanted to be. She saw how she wanted to act, how she wanted young people to respect her, the drive that this woman had, and the effect that she had on other lives. So she saw, she had a vision materialized in that one person.
Who was Lucy Laney?
She was a founder of Haynes Institute in Augusta, Georgia, which is a school that is similar to Dr. Bethune, but I actually think, well, it's without a doubt that Dr. Bethune used that and added to it and became bigger and better. But that's where she got her start.
And then now you mentioned about her dreams. What are you saying about the dreams? What was that?
Well, at some point in time, she had 3 dreams, and those dreams, and at least a couple of them came when she was gravely ill. She had a high fever, and and if anybody's ever had a high fever, you know that your brain goes over in overdrive at that point in time. You start thinking about all kinds of things, you dreaming and what have you. Well, that happened to her, but they became directive in that it showed her that her parents in one dream had taken her as far as they could go. She had to go she was crossing a river, and she had to continue on by herself. They took her as far as they could take her. Then the second dream had to do with a teacher, and he got her almost across, and then he had gone as far as he could go. Or maybe he got her all the way across the river. But the last person was Booker T. Washington in her dream. And he rode up to her on a white horse and pulled out a dirty handkerchief and handed it to her. But it had a diamond in it. And he told her to go start the school. Now, these were dreams. And she got up, she rose, and made those dreams come true.
Holy smokes.
Were there any tragedies in her life that she had to overcome?
Things that I don't get into because I don't research the family so much, so I don't talk about them that much. But a lot of times people will ask me about what happened to her husband. Well, there is some family drama that took place that she had to overcome. The fact that she was so dedicated to the school, and any parent, that first generation sometimes do not get the attention that they should. And she ended up raising her grandson. Now, beyond that, don't ask me any additional drama because I don't go into that. I don't know. I understand that there is others, but I just don't research that part.
Okay. Are there any good biographies written about her, or have there been?
Oh, yes, there are. There's one that's called Mary McLeod Bethune by Catherine Owens Peer, and then When and Where I Enter, The Impact of Black Women on Race and Sex in America by Paula Giddens, The Life and Legacy of Mary McLeod Bethune by Nancy Long, and also the former curator of the foundation, and I forget her first name. I think her last name is Ms. Robinson. And she's extremely well versed on Dr. Bethune, obviously, because she managed this house. That the first time I visited the house, she was there to give me a tour.
I was going to ask you if you'd been through her house.
Yes, I've been through the house, and I've also performed on campus. Now, in the house, one of the most fascinating things that was shown is that she was getting ready to go out for an event the night she passed away, and her clothes are still on the bed.
Oh, wow.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Her final residence is the house you are mentioning. It is a National Historic Site in Daytona on the campus of Bethune-Cookman in non-COVID times, open to the public for tours and that sort of thing, I would imagine. And you mentioned that you have performed there. Where do you typically perform? What kind of schedule do you typically have? And again, understanding that through 2020, I'm sure most of that was sidetracked by the pandemic.
Well, you might say, but then again, I went virtual.
Yeah.
I actually have a curtain. You can't see that, but I have a curtain that's in my house. Mm-hmm. I pull that curtain, and sometimes I will perform in front of the curtain.
What sort of groups do you perform in front of? And do you have a set script, or do you just kind of go in with a general idea of what you're going to say?
Yes and yes. I work from a script, but based on the organization that I'm performing before, I alter that script to make it appropriate, because she had such a diverse background and the places that she went. I would look to see if there's something that's associated with that particular location, and then talk about that within the script. I tend to perform for humanities associated organizations like libraries, Friends of the Libraries,
museums,
schools,
I would imagine. Yeah.
Fraternities, sororities, those kinds of things. Now, I perform based on request. So it depends on who asks.
Yeah, and we will have a link in the show notes to how you can book a performance if folks would be so interested in doing that. Where does the period costume come from that you perform in?
One of the books that I use as a resource, Building a Better World, I think it is, has her in this black velvet-looking outfit, floor-length gown to some degree, with pearls and earrings to match, and a couple of big buttons in the front. And I went out and made that outfit, used the sewing skills that my grandmother taught me. It works.
Now, do people
obviously, that cover is actually a photograph of her.
Do people kind of get caught up in the character that you're doing and try and talk to you about contemporary stuff as if you were really there? Really?
Yeah, that happens all the time. And if it's during my question and answer in character, they may ask something that I have no idea about as that character. And I'll go, honey, you all right? What are you talking about?
They'll ask you about Martin Luther King, and you'll be going,
yeah. Why would you ask me about that young man? But the most interesting time, or the thing that I remember the most, were two little girls, maybe 8 or 9 years old. They approached me, and one little girl just started asking me questions, and she was all into it. And the other little girl say, "That's not really her." And the one that was asking went, "Oh, shucks."
They thought you were a time traveler.
Yes. I was delighted that she thought that, but I was so disappointed that I had, it just destroyed her for the moment.
Yeah, it's a Santa Claus moment there.
Yeah, it was. Because they had been reading about her in school and what have you. But I know that feeling because I had that same kind of feeling with Mark Twain and Hal Holbrook. It's like I couldn't tell which was which, for a long time.
Well, I understand you had a pretty good interaction with Dr. Bethune's granddaughter.
Yes, I did. I was performing at the college or at the university, and this woman walks up behind me and taps me on the shoulder, and she said, "Hello, grandmother."
Oh my.
And I turned, and it was her granddaughter, and she was so pleased at the way that I had portrayed her. It just warmed my heart, because for a descendant to be pleased with how someone represents their ancestor. You can't get any better than that.
If she were alive today, what do you think she would be doing?
Getting people out to vote.
Yeah.
And fighting voter suppression.
She'd be working with Stacey Abrams, probably.
Yeah, she would. Oh, they would probably be right in with each other.
That is a full-time job in Florida, let alone nationally or anywhere else. Scary, considering the number of bills working through the various state legislatures across the country now, as state legislatures are back in session. Craig and I began the episode talking about that, how many voter restriction, voter limitations, attempts to suppress voting, which disproportionately affects Black and minority voters for any number of reasons. So there's never been a time we couldn't use more Mary McLeod Bethunes, and there was only one. But boy, oh boy, could we use 20 or 30 or 50 or 1,000 more right now. Ersula K Odom has been our guest. She portrays Mary McLeod Bethune. Again, in the show notes, I will link to how you can contact her and make a reservation to have her perform for your group. You're doing great work. We've enjoyed this conversation and really filling out the life and personality of a titanic figure in Florida's history for us.
Before you go, I did have one other question. She's been chosen to be the new statue in Washington to represent Florida, replacing a Confederate general. What do you think she would think about that? Would she be pleased? Would she feel like, oh, I'm not worthy? Or how do you think she would react to that?
I don't think anything in her would have said she was not worthy. What she might have said was she was chosen to be the representative of what's possible, and her works are being rewarded on behalf of the people that she worked for. Because she often said that the children that she nurtured, their story is her story. So she would be representing them.
Wow. Ersula, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks again. This was great.
Craig, you mentioned these statues in Washington, and I don't know how many people are familiar with what you're talking about. Each state is allowed to have two statues, and is it the Capitol Rotunda?
It's in what they call statuary hall, where they have two statues for representing each state.
Right. So legislatures from the state, way back in the day, were allowed to vote on which figures they would like to represent them. Mm-hmm. A number of states, including Florida, chose Confederate military officials, others outright racists and generally scurrilous characters. I had no idea that Florida, thankfully, was replacing one of its choices, a Confederate general, with
Edmund Kirby Smith. Yeah, he was from St. Augustine, and he was born there and then left and never came back. So he was a really weird choice anyway. I mean, how does that represent Florida, a guy who never really lived here?
Well, and you put yourself in the shoes of the people who made that choice at the time they made that choice. That is one of those that is not about heritage or about, trying to share history. That is to needle Black people. That is a middle finger to the civil rights movement. When is this, talking about something that's 50 years overdue, when is the replacement scheduled to take place?
I don't know. But the legislature approved this in the last couple of sessions. There was some discussion about who would replace the Confederate general, and with people talking about Zora Neale Hurston, for instance. I think Philip Randolph, another civil rights leader, was another suggestion. But ultimately, they chose Mary McLeod Bethune, who obviously, had such an impressive career and did so much that we are still benefiting from today. I also want to mention, by the way, do you know who our second statue is of?
I have no idea. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. Let me get.
No. This is actually the perfect choice. It's Dr. John Gorey, the guy who invented air conditioning from Apalachicola.
Purely on the basis of that achievement, or
yes, because think what Florida would be like without air conditioning.